Disco Elysium might just be one of the best games I've ever played. I initially picked it up on sale because I was excited to try a new RPG and was blown away in my first playthrough. It's only as I'm writing the script that I just realized, shit, this might be one of the greatest games of all time. So grab your favorite snack and join me to do a complete review of Disco Elysium and really figure out if it's a masterpiece that people say it is, or if we're just overrating it because it had no competition and it was essentially the first game of its genre. Before that, I wanted to give you guys a quick rundown of how I rate games since it's a bit different from everyone else. I'll be judging the game on 4 categories: narrative, sensory, game design, and finally subjectivity. Under the narrative portion, we'll have plot, characters, voice acting. Under sensory, we'll have visuals and then sound. Under game design, we'll have gameplay, level design, and progression system. And finish off with some subjective opinions and then close it out. Now, with all that being said, let's start off with the plot. Disco Elysium is about a man that wakes up hungover in the middle of a smashed up hotel room trying to figure out who he is and how to solve the murder mystery of a man hung outside of the hotel. From the jump, this is probably one of the best narrative premises I have ever seen in video games. Just like the MC, you have no idea what on earth is going on and you have to play it as this discombobulated shell of a man that's trying to piece together everything while voices are running rampant inside his head. It's especially good because technically there's 2 mysteries. 1, who's the hanged man outside and who murdered him, and 2, who the hell are you? Both of them running at the same time, and while the MC has to figure out who he is while also trying to figure out the murder mystery, I thought that was an extremely interesting premise. I think it's probably the best in gaming in general, just how well the game hooks you in the first hour. The plot is generally paced well, with our detectives having to investigate every nook and cranny to piece together the mystery while completing all sorts of side quests that seem like a waste of time but all neatly come full circle in the end. Honestly, wish the pacing was a little tighter though. There are parts of this game where I feel like I was stuck between tasks and I couldn't really progress the plot without running around and waiting for time to pass, which really slowed down the pacing. We'll get into this later in the review, but the game really doesn't have a skip time feature and that hurts the pacing occasionally. Despite some of its pacing issues, however, the game does a phenomenal job of keeping up the tension of the murder mystery, and that carries much of the plot progression. That being said, I think all of this build-up was kinda let down by how they reveal the identity of the killer at the end. For a game that painstakingly builds up intrigue and mysterious storytelling, the final reveal of the killer was a bit of a letdown to the lofty standards that it had set for the rest of its own playthrough. Thankfully, most of the resolutions for a lot of side quests were also done extremely well, so this kind of offsets it there. They all had a certain gravitas that made this game feel realistic and kept the playthrough interesting as the murder plot unraveled and you learned more and more about the MC. I just think it's a shame that the big ending, while definitely good, don't get me wrong, wasn't as peak as I thought it would be. But where this game really shines and gets most of its credit is its unprecedented level of narrative agency. You can literally tailor your playstyle depending on what kind of skill set you want to roleplay into, creating extremely vivid and lifelike playthroughs that feel so different from each other. I never played a game that gives such immense agency to the player within the same story. Your skill specs can wildly change the texture of your playthrough, and I think this game deserves massive props for that. I also like how there's no wrong answers. In my playthrough, I didn't even manage to retrieve my gun because of some of the pacing issues I talked about earlier, and I didn't explore some of the apartment complexes, none of that. But I still had no problem finishing the game with an ending that still felt congruent, which I think is massive for this kind of game. So, despite the less than ideal pacing and payoff, because of the narrative agency alone, I still think the plot of Disco Elysium deserves a 10 out of 10. Quick plug here guys, if y'all are enjoying my video so far, like the video real quick so it gets boosted to other people who will also enjoy this kind of content. Now, back to it. Next, we'll be talking about the character arcs in Disco Elysium. This game does an extremely good job of first impression characterization. Literally 2 seconds into meeting a new character, you know exactly what they're about. The MC in particular is done brilliantly. Waking up in your hotel room hungover with no memory of who you are is a brilliant concept, and the game makes you feel like some sort of amnesic alcoholic with how disorienting it feels at the start, which makes the first hour of this game extremely compelling. Actually, to be honest guys, outside of Elden Ring or Cyberpunk, I don't think I've ever played a game with a more compelling first hour than Disco Elysium, and the fact that it isn't an action title makes it even more impressive. It's funny how the hanged man, who is strategically placed basically at the center of the map, is the central catalyst behind all of the characters and their arcs. No matter how far you get away from him, his influence is constantly felt throughout not only the detective's investigation, but also the supporting characters, how they react to his death and what that says about their own biases and motives. In addition to the hanged man, there are various other problems bubbling under the surface, everything from relationships to socio-political struggles. The MC's own struggle with regaining his memories and escaping his alcoholism is also a huge component of the playthrough. There are so many times where you just simply fail dialogue checks because he's a discombobulated clown who's trying to solve the murder mystery as well as the mystery of who the fuck he really is. Kim, his partner, is excellent as a straight man to the MC's crazy antics. He's a stand-in for the average player, trying to understand what the hell is going on and giving an air of normalcy during what is otherwise a wacky mystery full of eccentric personalities. Even though the game sorta kinda chokes the ending, the resolution to these character arcs are pretty sound across the board. Kim respects and vouches for Harry, our MC at the end, calling him one of the best detectives he's ever seen. In the very short time you get to know him, Dross gets a satisfying ending for his relatively short arc. My only problem is how Harry's reveal is just exposition dumped at the end. The game was doing such a fantastic job of slowly peeling back the layers to his character throughout the story, only for it to stop and word vomit everything at the end. This is one of the few major issues I have with Disco Elysium. I've already said it once, but I'll say it again. They kinda choked the ending. The stuff about him being a gym teacher and romancing Dora could have been communicated throughout the plot. They did such a good job of giving bits and pieces of him here and there that I was sort of disappointed I didn't get to have a big aha moment when it came to solving Harry, so I'll have to take off a point here and give the character arcs in Disco Elysium a 9 out of 10. Wrapping up the narrative portion, we're just going to briefly talk about the voice acting in this game because it's a straight up 10 out of 10. This game is a rare instance of an unvoiced protagonist being completely and utterly carried by what is probably the best supporting cast I've ever seen. Everyone has their own unique flair, their personalities are communicated extremely well throughout their performances, and they add a lot of heart and soul to the game. Since it doesn't really have any action, the game relies heavily on its voice acting to make the game feel really compelling and make the players feel the story as it's unfolding. I really can't reiterate how integral the voice acting is to this specific genre. It's carried mostly by the narrator, who does an absolutely phenomenal job with all the voices inside Harry's head.
Yes, you often sound like a brutal idiot.
My only teeny tiny nitpick is that we didn't get different voice actors for all the emotions, maybe due to budgetary constraints. But since the voice acting is so damn good, I'm not gonna even dog a point for this, guys. It's just like a perfect 10 out of 10. By the way guys, if you guys like this review style and like me breaking down different categories and giving them a score each, I'm going to be doing a lot more gaming reviews on this specific style. So if you guys like that, subscribe so you know when the next video is going to drop. Now that we've covered the narrative portion of the game, we're going to move on to the sensory portion, covering both visuals and music. Starting with visuals, I think that the watercolor painting art style of the game was very well done, and together with the music, gives this game a sort of a old school London streets vibe. It perfectly correlates with the fictionalized time period of the game, with a lot of its Cold War tropes, and does a phenomenal job of inserting the player directly into that world. I also like how diverse the city of Martinez was, and how each district had its own distinct visual thematic and sort of aura, which made the city feel different depending on what district you were running around in. The cutscenes, especially when Harry is analyzing a crime scene, was done exceptionally well. I really like the color pattern and the different effects there. Honestly guys, for a discombobulated alcoholic, motherfucker turns into Sherlock Holmes when it's time to put the pieces together one by one, and it was a really nice visual flourish. The only problem I had with the visuals was that while it was beautiful to look at as a painting, a lot of the smaller minutiae were a bit lackluster. It was kind of hard to form a visual connection with the characters when they were shaped like blobs with mustaches. I think this was a problem of leaning too much into the watercolor art direction. The finer details during the playthrough kind of get swept up with the canvas style rendering. And yes, the portraits help during dialogue, but honestly not being able to make out the facial expressions of the character as they were giving out the dialogue, that really took out some of the immersion for me. So I unfortunately have to dock a point there and give the visuals of Disco Elysium a 9 out of 10. The audio and sound is equally well done. The main themes for this game are super catchy and very, very memorable. The melancholic blend of the ambient post-rock plus the coastal noir makes Martinez feel like a cold and just an emotionally bleak setting, which is actually perfect for a detective RPG. The music uses textual restraint to reinforce the general ambience of the story and the characters through somber instrumentation that just inspires this dreamlike feel of urban loneliness. Sea Power really knocked it out of the park with this one, and they deserve all the accolades they received for composing the score. Unfortunately, I don't think it deserves a perfect 10 because it's shockingly limited in its intensity sequences. The game masterfully builds up to its big interrogations, which require a series of hard skill checks to weave through the dialogue and extract information that pertains to the mysteries. Honestly guys, I was so shocked that this extremely important and pivotal part of the game didn't have any background score at all, which really diluted my experience. I really don't think going with the dead silence approach was the correct idea, especially with how emotionally taxing and draining a lot of these sequences are. So unfortunately I had to take up a couple of points there and give the music and audio in Disco Elysium an 8 out of 10. Coming off a very strong sensory performance, let's move on to the game design aspects of Disco Elysium, where the game runs into some unexpected issues. Starting with the general systems of the game, this is obviously what Disco Elysium is famous for. The game is revolutionary for its level of detail and fantastic build expression. There's really no wrong answer here, and you're allowed to freely fail checks and the plot will accommodate you and rebound accordingly, pulling you into an alternate timeline while still keeping the plot beats intact, which was brilliant. For instance, I didn't even manage to retrieve my gun before the huge pivotal confrontation in the mid to late game, and instead of getting shot to pieces like John Marston, I was still able to maneuver through it because of the skills I had chosen to invest up until that point. Granted, it wasn't the perfect outcome. I was still blown away by how the game still manages to push the story forward and expects you to fail checks occasionally. Depending on what skills you spec into and how you choose to roleplay as Harry, certain dialogues will be available and you'll get certain insights on the case that you would have otherwise missed, which I thought was an excellent design choice. This also makes sense narratively since Harry's dealing with amnesia and has his psyche fragmented into 24 different personalities. You're essentially choosing to listen to one over the other, essentially shaping his character as a result. The progression curve is also done neatly, and there's a clear feeling of getting better with certain emotions and reaping the rewards of speccing into them over time, especially during pivotal interrogations. Speaking of pivotal interrogations, these are basically the game's boss encounters, and I was shocked at how much I enjoyed them. Like I mentioned earlier, these are long, taxing, and draining questionnaires where you have to intelligently weave back and forth between different talking points in order to extract the right information and manipulate the witnesses in your favor. The build up to each of these encounters were very well handled, and more often than not, the payoff was also very good and served as major breakthroughs within the story. Having certain skill sets over others can easily help or hurt you during these interrogations and can result in wildly different plot outcomes depending on your build. As far as other systems go, like memories, clothing, and tools, I thought most of them were done pretty well. The clothing system providing skill boosts were a really nice touch. Most of them came with a plus and a downside, so it really forced you to make concerted choices on what kind of skills you prioritized. However, I don't really like the memories part of the game though. I feel like they take up a lot of the system's budget in terms of presentation, but honestly they're like kind of completely useless for the most part. I honestly feel like they're a bit of a noob bait, and I think skill points are usually much better invested into powering up your key skills instead. Honestly guys, from a game progression and system standpoint, this game is simply exceptional. However, I'm only going to give it a 9 out of 10 instead of a perfect score, and you'll understand why once I start digging into the gameplay. Now, the gameplay is comprised mainly of dice roll skill checks. During some of these big interrogations, it can sort of feel like this verbal joust. You're constantly bobbing and weaving through sentences, and you will be punished for just picking every dialogue option on autopilot, so it requires concentrated effort and actively paying attention to what the characters are saying, which is a masterstroke of game design. I just wish this was more prevalent in the game because sometimes the dialogue can devolve into a word tsunami that I end up skipping through because it just got too boring for me to listen and read like mountains of text. But here's the point that I want to drive home for you guys. While the game gives you a lot of variety in terms of decisions you can make, I honestly think that variety is a bit fake. While the game likes to flex just how many skills it has and how many personalities can chime in during the gameplay, a few of these skills hold a lot of the power. Skills like authority, volition, logic, rhetoric, and reaction speed are significantly more important to progressing the story and achieving the better endings compared to damn near everything else combined. I'm not saying that the tree is bloated, since all of them have their own voice and can change the flavor of certain interactions, but they all could have been democratized to have the same level of impact within your playthrough. Because what's genuinely the point of having 24 different skills if 75% of them are completely filler? Disco Elysium is like uniquely weird in that sense that yes, it does have borderline transcendent game systems for creating an unprecedented level of player agency, but in reality, the agency runs wide, not deep. There's a shit ton to do, but only a few skills are genuinely worth investing into, which kind of ruins the whole mystique of the multiple personalities. No matter how many playthroughs you go through, those skills I mentioned are borderline mandatory to getting through the big interrogations or just like the big plot sequences in general, which I really kind of didn't like. Because think of it this way guys, if I wanted to start a second playthrough and roleplay a different personality, like a pure physical one for example, I know in the back of my head I'm going to fail a lot of the critical rhetoric and volition checks, which can seriously screw up my playthrough for these critical interrogations. And look, now I know it's asking a lot out of what's already an incredible game, but perhaps having multiple smaller skills play a part in critical moments could have helped smooth out the gameplay and give an incentive to invest into them. These filler skills are great for providing flavor text during the dialogue, but it feels really bad that most of them aren't used nearly enough in critical junctures throughout the playthrough. I'm actually curious to what you guys think about this. This is probably my biggest gripe with the game, and I understand that this kind of attention to detail and branching consequences might be asking too much of a game that was already ahead of its time in 2019. Do y'all think this is a valid concern to have, or am I just being overly nitpicky here? But in any case, I'm going to give the gameplay of Disco Elysium a 6 out of 10. It delivers on the basics reasonably well. And while the system is great in theory, it's ultimately a bit too far stuck up its own ass and doesn't actually support all the skills that it gives you access to, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of having 24 different personalities in the first place. Now, with that being said, let's move on to the world design portion of the game. While it's not expansive by any means, the small map of Martinez is done very well. This small, intimate map plays neatly into the ambience set by the art style and the neo-noir post-track soundtracks for the murder investigation. I actually think having a bigger map would have taken away from the game and made it feel like a little bit too bloated, so this was nice. The various side quests were also very well structured. I love how they were just woven into the main plot, and these stories allowed our characters to take a break from the murder investigation to solve other cases around Martinez. The game does a good job of not separating them into like strict main quests and side quests, so it just feels like one continuous motion of waking up from the hotel and trying to figure out what the hell is going on, which was really good for story immersion. As with any good game, the side quests do the lion's share in contextualizing the world you've been dropped into and understanding both of its mechanics and politics. Progressing in these side quests seamlessly move the main quest forward, whether it's forming connections, understanding the characters, unlocking memories and context, or just simply leveling up those precious skills. Pretty much the only thing I didn't really like about the world design was how the exploration kinda sucked. You can easily press a button and see everything you can interact with, which I thought was nice, but there isn't really much in terms of unique and fun things you can do outside of progressing the quests. The different clothing you get are nice, but they just sort of become redundant past the first several hours. I would have liked it if there were more interactable tools you picked up that shaped the game's trajectory or meaningfully changed the playthrough in any way. I feel like that's one of the bigger missed opportunities in this game. The tools was a good idea, but I feel like they were a bit underutilized. No pun intended. But other than that, I still think the world design is still very good, so I'll be giving this an 8 out of 10. Next up is the general quality of life. Now, quality of life is kind of sneaky important for CRPGs because the game is always a few wrong moves away from being a reading assignment. So not wasting the player's time and giving intuitive gameplay tools is paramount in keeping a short and fun feedback loop. The biggest quality of life problem I had was that the game didn't really have a skip time feature, which really caused pacing problems for me because certain quests needed certain times to activate and I just couldn't be bothered to sit around with my dick in my hand. That's how I ended up not being able to retrieve my gun before the big showdown, and it was genuinely very annoying. The mid-game slowed down pretty drastically for me and I kind of bounced off the game for a while because the general game pacing felt a little bit too slow and this lack of skip time feature just made everything so much worse. I also didn't like how you couldn't fast travel from like literally anywhere on the map and you had to be in like certain weird hotspots within the districts to activate fast travel, which felt kind of unintuitive and honestly confusing at times. I'd be at a regular spot trying to open up my map to travel and it simply wouldn't let me move until I moved like a few pixels over. Until the end of my playthrough, I still couldn't figure out like what was the internal logic behind that. I think the one tool that I really like is that how you can just simply press up a button to light up all the interactable objects within the vicinity. I think that was quite a really nice touch and it helped escape what would have been even more wasted time just like aimlessly clicking around the map. Overall, I think I'll give the quality of life in Disco Elysium a 6 out of 10. And for enjoyability, I think I wouldn't go any less than a 9 out of 10. Save for some annoying portions where I couldn't skip time and some janky pacing that made me like soft quit the game during the halfway point, I don't really have anything else to say bad about this game. I've really enjoyed it. Disco Elysium is a fantastic game that's going to influence way more of these isometric detective style playthroughs for decades to come. It has a phenomenal plot and it does an excellent job of fleshing out its amnesia character through compelling tension building and very impactful payoffs. All the characters are very memorable, in part due to the writing, but mostly due to the phenomenal voice acting in this game. Having parts of your personality split into different voices that you can spec skill points to advance is an ingenious system and creates an exciting premise where you can play the game like 4 to 5 times with different builds and have completely different interpretations of it each and every time. Ultimately, this genius system somewhat backfires in the actual gameplay given how dominant some skills are, exposing the whole diversity gimmick. Certain skills can completely overpower the whole table, and so the rest of the skills are only useful as flavor text than actual gameplay impact, which is honestly a bit of a letdown. Now, with all that being said, let's add up the scores. Plot, 10 out of 10. Characters, 9 out of 10. Voice acting, 10 out of 10. Visuals, 9 out of 10. Music, 8 out of 10. Gameplay, 6 out of 10. Progression and systems, 9 out of 10. World design, 8 out of 10. Quality of life, 6 out of 10. And overall enjoyability, 9 out of 10. So that brings Disco Elysium's score to a grand total of 84, putting it very firmly in the elite category. Now, it's up to y'all to tell me what you think. Do you agree with my scores for each of these categories? Let me know what you would have rated each category and how it's different from mine. Also guys, if you stuck around this long, make sure to like to boost the video to other people that will also enjoy it, and subscribe so you can stay tuned for when my next reviews drop. To check out my other reviews, look no further than my Gothic remake and Ghost of Tsushima reviews right here on your screen right now. Anyway, that's it from me in this video guys, thank you so much for watching and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.